In the immortal words of Frank the Tank, the Braves are going streaking, and all of a sudden things are finally getting interesting in the National League East. In for another Battery Power TV, Cory McCartney, along with Grant McCauley with you, and the Braves are taking an 8-game winning streak into the weekend, a run in which they've gained 4 games on the Mets in the division. They're still 6.5 out, Grant, but for the first time in a while this season, it feels like you can firmly say the champs are here.
Yeah, it certainly feels like this is a club that's found itself, its identity, and its ability to win games at a rate in which not only did they expect to do it, but quite frankly, fans have been waiting all season long to see the Braves follow up their World Series title with, I want to say, more of the same. We'll get to that stuff in October. There's a lot of baseball to be played between now and then, but you want to start feeling like, hey, we're on our path. We're on the road back there. And I think this 8-game win streak is a very big step in the right direction for this club.
We put so much focus on this part of the schedule, obviously a stretch of 29 straight against teams with losing records. You've heard that time and time again. Yep. There are 9 games left with the Nationals, the Cubs to follow the Pirates. This is the time to gain ground. It's happened. If the team's longest streak since August of 13th to the 22nd of last year, if you can look at it as taking advantage of a soft schedule, but this team has also been more than that, Grant. It's been opportunistic in turning things around.
Yeah, I think that they've not only looked at the schedule and felt like, hey, we should be able to pick up some ground here and done that, but in the way that they're winning and in the way that the club is starting to put things together where you're seeing good starting pitching efforts, you're seeing timely offense, you're seeing some blowout wins. I think you're seeing the bullpen start to figure some stuff out as well, because those guys aren't going to be perfect every single night. And I was having this discussion in the press box at Truist Park yesterday. This is a club where if the offense had been clicking, it would have covered up for at least a few of the late inning losses or the games in which you looked at it and said, oh, the bullpen let us down. Well, it's hard for the bullpen to be perfect every single night. Same thing for starters. If you only get a couple runs of support, you can look at the pitching staff and say, well, yeah, you guys gave up 4, but there were nights where the Braves are leaving 9 and 10 men on base, where they're going 1 for 13 with runners in scoring position. And that's just not a winning formula. So as you see them start to put it all together, the games feel a little bit more, I guess, organically like the Braves had designed it coming into the season.
Yeah, to me, it's the depth with which it's just happening. And you mentioned a little bit there, but since this stretch of games started on May 20th, the Braves have 6 players within the NL's top 50 and the most productive hitters in terms of weighted run created plus. That's topped by the continually surprising William Contreras, Ronald Acuna Jr., Austin Riley, Dansby Swanson, Travis d'Arnaud, and Matt Olson. As a team, they've scored the 4th most runs in that stretch, the 2nd most in the NL. They've hit the 6th most home runs. And I think because you mentioned it there, this has been the sticking point with this team all season to this point. They're in the top 10 in nearly every category with runners in scoring position during that run. And then you slide it over to the pitching, and the staff is top 10 in ERA and average against. They have the 2nd most strikeouts. Max Fried has a 1.38 ERA in this run. Kyle Wright's at 1.75. It's up and down the roster, a team that has finally found itself again, and it's really hard to find holes at this point.
It really is. And where the Braves had holes, they have made an effort to fill that. And I think that the promotion of Michael Harris II was a real good example of the Braves realizing, all right, we've got to find some level of consistency in our outfield from a defensive alignment standpoint. We've got to give ourselves a chance to get a little bit better, which Harris has certainly done. I'm not going to say he's the spark, the only spark, but since he's shown up, things for the Braves have looked different. It's felt different, especially in the outfield where he's made some tremendous catches, but also in the way that the lineup has been constructed, because now we're seeing Ronald Acuna Jr. starting for a week straight in right field, not being 2 games in right, a DH, or 2 games at DH and 1 game in right. That little dance has stopped, and that has allowed them to move Adam Duvall out of center and over into left field. Having Michael Harris in center field also allows them to do that. And you can put Marcell Ozuna in the DH spot and not have to worry about the defensive component when, offensively speaking, he's still trying to find himself there. So all of those were things that we just kept talking about, Corey. When the Braves can get Acuna in right field, how much of a difference is that going to make for this club? I think it's made a big difference, but the arrival of Michael Harris II allowed for that to not only be something the Braves needed, but also something that has benefited them greatly in ways that maybe a month ago they weren't thinking about.
I caught up with Michael Harris earlier this week in the clubhouse. I thought it was funny. I asked him if it still feels different 10, 11 games in, every time he puts on that uniform, he goes, well, first of all, it feels different because it's a different quality than the uniforms that they had in the minor leagues. But he said, obviously, it still feels, different every time, just what that uniform means to him each time. The Braves did split with the Mets in their only meeting back in early May at Citi Field. Won't see them again till right before the All-Star break. So shaping up for things to look very, very different when they do meet again. I mentioned there aren't many holes, but it's not all perfect. While the offense has 8 players who are hitting above league average in this midst of this stretch, Marcell Ozuna continues to just have a rough go. During this run, he's one of the 3 everyday players who has a weighted run created plus lower than league average. He's 13% below right now. You could previously, Grant, point to the fact that he was in the outfield and say, okay, maybe that's some additional wear and tear on the body, and he can't just focus on being DH. But he's been a DH in 7 of the last 8 games, and is hitting .212 in that run, of 520 OPS, 1 extra base hit. What this team is doing is really impressive when you think about the fact that one of their top bats is not in the midst and not delivering. But you can look at the ebb and flow of it all and say, okay, when they do get Ozuna back, they could be that much better. But the continued issue of trying to find consistent ABs for William Contreras, which we've talked about before, I think that just makes Marcell Ozuna's struggle stick out that much more.
It does a bit, but I'm also of the opinion that you have to manage expectations a little bit and manage the workload of William Contreras in a different way. This is, as much as you would like to have him, I think, in the lineup every single day to be able to ride that hot bat. His job now as the second catcher for the Braves means that he's going to be pressed into duty behind the plate and will need a little bit of time here and there just to make sure that everything's going well with him. Plus, you just want to be able to, for sure, not run the risk of losing your designated hitter should something happen. I know that's not the number one thing, but it is something that's in the mix there as well. When they were looking at William Contreras as kind of the third catcher on the roster and maybe being creative with putting him in the outfield, where frankly, he hasn't really looked that comfortable. We haven't seen him very much, but he hasn't been out there long enough for me to feel that he needs to be getting reps in the outfield on a regular basis. He's not going to start at first base. He's not going to start at third base. Where are you going to put him? Well, that you don't even have to worry about that anymore, because that's not part of the way that his playing time is being looked at, because once Manny Pena went down, the role for Contreras is a little bit different. So I think just based on as much as you can, getting him in there behind the plate and finding some starts for him at DH, the Braves will continue to do that. But the things have shifted just a bit in terms of being able to utilize that bat in a way that maybe you're able to plug him in at DH for a while and give Ozuna a little bit of a breather. But you need Marcell to produce to kind of, come all the way back to that. I don't know that it was wear and tear in the outfield necessarily, as much as it's, you spend as much time off from the game of baseball and you try to come back and get consistent again. Plus, you had a bad year before you got hurt and got in some other issues in 2021. This guy hasn't really looked like the player that he was for the Braves in 2020, or really even the player that he was throughout his big league career prior to that for a while in terms of consistency. The Braves need some of that. They got to figure that out. I will say, though, I was out at the park yesterday. Eddie Rosario was hitting in the cage on the field. So he was taking live BP. And so that's something for the Braves to monitor as well, because it looks like he's going to be back closer to that 8-week mark than the 12-week mark from that initial estimate of the range of time it could take for Rosario to be back in the mix. What will that mean to the Braves, the outfield, the DH, all of the different things that you're going to have to consider once Eddie Rosario is part of this mix as well?
Yeah, that could be huge. And because Ozuna, this 2 years ago led the National League in home runs and RBIs. And now you're talking about a guy who has hit as low as 7th in these past few games as he tries to find himself again. The series of the Pirates continues throughout this weekend with the Nationals to follow. Spencer Strider, Charlie Morton, and Kyle Wright scheduled to get the ball as this 4-game series with Pittsburgh rolls on. I've got my eye, Grant, on that Saturday start with Charlie Morton. He's allowed 4 earned in each of his last 3 starts. His curveball, which he's thrown more than anyone in baseball to this point in the season, hasn't been nearly as effective as it was in the past. I detailed this in my piece this week on Battery Power on the Braves' most unhittable pitches. That curve, which you think historically would be in the mix, is not. The average against it's jumped nearly 170 points year over year. The Pirates absolutely struggle against the curveball. 7 players with whiff rates nearly 40% or higher. I think this has the makings of a Morton rebound. Who do you have your eyes on in this series?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that Spencer Strider is going to be getting his first start at home. I'm interested to see what he's able to do, because it's kind of been a mixed bag thus far. He had a deceptive line in Arizona. He walked a few more batters than he would like in Colorado, but now he's at home in his ballpark with a chance to just have that routine be a little bit different and be perhaps a little bit more energized in front of a home crowd as well. So I'm looking at that because I still want to see what he does with this time in rotation, because it could be fleeting. We don't know yet, but there is obviously a timetable that's in the back of the mind, at the very least, of the Braves in getting Mike Soroka back. And that is, of course, a big if, as much as it's a win, because you have seen him suffer some setbacks over the last couple of years. And it has been nearly 2 years since he's been on a big league mound in a big league game. So this is not a given, but it is part of what the Braves are looking for in the future, which means that there is a limited time for Spencer Strider to perhaps prove himself in the rotation. Now, what happens when Soroka is ready to return? I don't know. We'll see how that all plays out. But I think it obviously, for Spencer, if he wants to be a big league starting pitcher, the opportunity is right there in front of him. Go out there and run with it as best you can.
Little call back to that piece I did. Strider's slider is one of the most unhittable pitches on that. So give that a look if you want. If you can't get enough of us, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on those alerts to get notified each and every time we drop a new episode. Also, you can find us Sunday nights from 5 to 7 on 92.9 The Game in Atlanta on From the Diamond. For Grant McCauley, I'm Cory McCartney. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon, Braves Country.